What is going on, guys? How are we doing? We are just hanging out here at the 533 shop today, and I figured no better time with Ice Storm quickly approaching that we get a little TinyTrainer build live stream going for you guys with our brand new TinyTrainer Z frame. This thing is seriously awesome. I have been flying it at the past 3 or 4 of our TinyTrainer winter series here in Tennessee, and it has performed great. So I'm so excited for more people to be building this. But what I will say is that there are a few tips and tricks that would be good to consider at least before building your TinyTrainer Z up, and things with the build that might make things more convenient down the line, such as USB port access and your XT30 lead and things like that. So we'll be getting into all that and more. We'll talk about the different components that we're using on our TinyTrainer Zs. This is actually going to be for a customer build, but if you want one of these TinyTrainer Zs, we will be selling a few of them before Ice Storm, which is exciting. So if you're coming to Ice Storm and you don't have time to build, you can go ahead and hit us up, and maybe this TinyTrainer will be yours, or maybe the one we're building today. They both are going to be going out to whoever wants them. Again, go to fly533.com and you can pick yours up, which is super, super exciting. With that in mind, we are going to get started with the build in just a second, hanging out with some guys in the chat here. So I'm going to probably give this about 2 or 3 more minutes before we really get into the meat and potatoes here, just so we can kind of have a second, make sure we get some more people in here, so as many people as possible can kind of benefit from this as we get through into the process here. So if you're watching right now, looks like we've got a few people online. If you wouldn't mind shouting out, saying what's up, I'd love to hear from you. And also, I do want to say that at any point, if you have any questions about the TinyTrainer spec, any questions about any upcoming events, or just 533 stuff in general, drone questions, I am here for you. So please go ahead, drop those in the chat, and we can start a little conversation here. Definitely make this a little bit more exciting for me as well. So super excited for that. We got the stream set up here. I'm going to try my best to make this as easy to kind of see the build process as possible. We've got a few close-up cameras right here, one of which is this angle right here. So you can kind of see this is what we're building today. This is our TinyTrainer Z right here. And then we also have a second angle, which is kind of coming from the back here as well, which can be a little bit closer up, but depending on how I'm soldering, I might have a hand in front of one camera or something like that. Call it out if you want to see something again or see something up close. We can definitely make that happen as we get into the build process here. So having a little up close look at our TinyTrainer Z, this one I just did the other day and is exactly what we're going to be building in this live stream here. And you can see it is just like our zigzag frame, has elevated rear motors, just like so, and that allows the airflow, or the stream of air coming in as you're like flying through, to be a lot cleaner for the rear propellers, which typically when the propellers are right next to each other can cause some prop wash and some adverse effects that we believe the Z frame will help with, especially in a spec race series like the TinyTrainer class. So really exciting stuff there. And also because of that, it makes it a little bit easier of a build. This is a very simplistic frame design when you think about it. Obviously we put a lot of time and thought into how we do this. But it's a very easy to build. It's just a set of standoffs between 2 different plates, and the plates are identical, which is awesome. So no matter which arm you break, all you have to do is buy a TinyTrainer Z body plate, which we will be selling individually at some point. And you can just go ahead and replace that single plate. You don't have to worry about getting a special part or an entire kit or anything like that, which is really cool. So as we get into things here, I just wanted to say thanks again to everybody that came out to our TinyTrainer Winter Series up at Clinton High School in Clinton, Tennessee. We had an awesome time. It was great flying in their indoor turf facility. You know, not a lot of high schools, at least from where I'm from in Ohio, have a turf facility like that. So for them to have that facility to use and then let us use it for free, really be supportive of what we're doing here at 533 is really, really cool. So we're thankful for them, and we're thankful for everybody that made the journey out to come race with us. It was super awesome. I know a lot of people came in from all directions. We had Callie and Shames, who are 1-2 on the season podium at the end of the season. They were coming in, of course, from Missouri, and that's like a 10 or more hour drive, which is awesome. I know Bumblebee and her family came a few times. It was 8 hours. Flyboy has, I think, at least 6 hours or something like that, or more to drive. So it really means a lot to us that you guys show your support for what we're doing and just come out and race and hang with us, because we're all racers too, and we like to kind of hang out and do the whole collaboration and community aspect of this, not only alongside, of course, the competition. Anyways, we're going to go ahead and get into this build first. So I'm going to start off with talking about the things that you need as far as components, and then we'll start off, we'll next talk about the different tools that will be useful, as well as some things as we go into it, preparing the electronics, things like that, how I like to do the process as we go along. Okay, I'm going to get started in just a second. But as you can see, guys, once again, here's the finished TinyTrainer. This is exactly what we're building in today's video. This one is configured for 550 milliamp hour 3S. We actually are going to be modifying the spec just slightly for Ice Storm, which is coming up. So you can see we have this battery right here. This is a bigger battery than we typically fly with our TinyTrainers. This is a 4S 550 milliamp hour battery, and what we are going to be doing with this, allowing you to fly with this spec battery, which will be available soon on fly533.com. This battery is going to be RPM limited within the TinyTrainer spec, and that will hopefully allow for more full throttle racing and less battery sag on the big track that we always have at Ice Storm. In the past, we've had issues where you get to the end of the race and it's significantly a different style of racing than in the beginning of the race, again, due to the 3S 550 battery sag. Typically, TinyTrainer, at least how we run it at 533, of course, clubs are allowed to run it however they like to, are run without an RPM limiter, so that's typically how we do it. But we're gonna go ahead and we're looking at like a 40.5 thousand RPM limit for this time around. But in the future, however your club likes to run it, I know that there is a CAC spec, an official spec for TinyTrainer, which is 30,000 K or 30,000 K, just 30,000. Sorry, just 30,000 RPM, and essentially that is a little bit of a slower spec. So we like to race these TinyTrainers fast, and that's what we're going to be doing at Ice Storm. If you're looking for more information on the spec that we're going to use at Ice Storm, of course, stay tuned on the Fly533 Facebook page and Instagram and all of our socials. We'll have more information on that here in the next week or so. So again, we're building this right here. Let's go ahead and start talking about the pieces and parts that you're going to need to get this build done. Of course, you're going to need your frame kit. It's going to look just like this. We got our carbon right here. On the other side, we of course have our hardware. We're also going to need the TPU kit. And so we have our battery sleeve right here. We have our antenna mount, of course, right here. And this is an interesting piece, and this is actually an XT30 mount. So you're going to mount this around the standoffs, and this will mount the XT30 in place, so you can just plug in the battery nice and easily. Super cool little print there. And then this is your camera mount and also the front battery retainer. So that is our TPU kit, and depending on the type of build that you're going to do, the height of the standoffs, namely, you will need different. You'll need different TPUs. So this is a 15 millimeter standoff canopy right here. You can see this little length right here, 15 millimeters, and that's what this TinyTrainer is, of course, right here. But just for comparison, this is just the frame with the TPU kit on a 20 millimeter build. So you can see. Let me bring it down right here. trying to adjust in the frame, but this gives you 5 more millimeters of stack height. So if you want to you do an analog build or have some different hardware, maybe 3 boards instead of just 2, you can use 20 millimeter standoffs, or if you want to use 23 or even more millimeters, you can just go ahead and do that. Of course, all these TPU files are available online, so you can modify them however you'd like, and if you want as much build height as you want, you can kind of adjust the standoff size accordingly. So that's the TPU kit we'll have. Again, we're doing a 15 millimeter standoff build today, so that's the TPU I have picked out. Of course, we're going to get into electronics now as well. This is an HD0 and ELRS build, so of course here is our Happy Model EP2 TXCO receiver. Great little receiver with a ceramic antenna, so super easy, no antenna mounting required. Then, of course, we have the HD0 Whoop V2 video transmitter here. This is new and improved. We used to build these with the Whoop light, but now this Whoop V2 is great, considerably more durable, as well as has an antenna retainer built into it, similar like the Race V3 has, which is really cool. So we like this video transmitter for the HD0 builds, of course, but the Whoop light is also a good build for this as well. And then we, of course, have the HD0 Nano 90 V2 camera. The V2 means that it comes with the upgraded glass lens, so I really like that lens, and it's really convenient that that's already pre-installed, no focusing or lens swap required. Then getting into the good stuff here, of course, we have our HackRC all-in-one. This is a 20 amp all-in-one, and we really like these HackRC products. They've been incredibly reliable for us, and they seem to get the job done. We also carry the 40 amp version, and I know some people like the 40 amp version on the TinyTrainers. You really only need the 20 amp, but either one will work depending on what you like to build with, of course. And I believe that the 40 amp has an F722 processor, and this one has F411. Yep, it's an F411 on the HackRC here. And then, of course, our TinyTrainer's spec motors here as well. And finally, our VTX antenna is a TrueRC core right-hand circular polarized. This is a 45 millimeter stem right here. So we sell the 85 millimeter as well, but the 45 is pretty solid for these smaller builds as well. It doesn't have a lot of extra pigtail that you have to loop around. Of course, finally, you're also going to need some props for your build, and these are the HQ Tiny Prop 3.1 or 3-inch 1.8 pitch props, and they're tri-blades, of course. And that is all of the parts that you'll need to do your build here. Let me get them out of the way, and we'll go ahead and get this build started. So, of course, you're going to need a few different tools for our build today. We'll need some scissors to open packaging, of course, some side cutters as well. You're going to need 2 different sizes of screwdriver. We've got a 2mm screwdriver right here and a 1.5 millimeter screwdriver as well. And then I like to have a variety of different tweezers handy as well. And the last thing you'll need is a small Phillips head screwdriver, and that will be used for that antenna retainer that I mentioned just a minute ago as well. Finally, I also like to, of course, build with an Omni Fixo. These things are super handy. They make it very easy to get a build together and solder. So recommend buying one of these things. Some people are driven away by the high price tag, but as someone that's been building with one of these for quite a bit of time, they are super, super useful tools and definitely worth the price tag. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started with our build here. Super exciting. Ready to do this. If you're just joining us, of course, wanted to say welcome to our build here for the TinyTrainer Z. Again, this is a new build for us, a new frame type. We are super excited. We've been testing this thing since December or November of last year, and now that it's out on the market, I thought it'd be a really good idea that we go ahead and do a build so you can kind of have a source of reference when you're building your Z, so you can see the different tips and tricks and nuances of this build that make it a little bit unique. And also there's some things that might trip you up if you try to do it a traditional way, like you're building a normal TinyTrainer. And if you put a little bit of thought into it and use some of the tips that I have for you, I think it can make it a lot more convenient for the build process, but also when it comes to doing things like accessing your USB port for configuration purposes in Betaflight as well. So very excited. Let's go ahead and do this thing here and get this started. Okay, so let's get started by opening up the packaging for our frame. Charlita says, why you got to call me out like that, Custom? Hey, you know, all's fair. I'm sure it's coming right back at me. So we are going to open up the packaging for our frame, of course, here. And once again, I'm going to mention it, but this is the number one reason why we love this frame so much, because it is just dead simple. There are two pieces right here, and they are identical to one another. So if you break your top plate or your bottom plate, just get a replacement plate, and you are all good to go. Whether it's the top or bottom, it doesn't matter. They're exactly the same. So super convenient. These replacement plates will be available on the store very, very shortly. Then let's talk through some of the hardware. Of course, we've got our M3 screws here. These are for our standoffs, top and bottom. We've got our stack screws. Future revisions are going to come with these M2 nuts. So if you already have them, they're good to use if you're getting a current version of our frame, but our next batch is going to come with the nuts in there as well. And then, of course, we have our standoffs. We get the 20 millimeter and the 15 millimeter standoffs as well. So depending on which one you want to use, all the builds that are coming out of our ready to fly build line are going to have the 15 millimeter standoffs on them, unless specifically noted, of course. And that's just a quick tip. If you are buying a ready to fly from us, from our build team, if you want any customizations done of any kind, please do let us know in your order notes, and we will do our best to accommodate you. Depending on what you are trying to use the drone for, or what type of flying you like to do, everyone does it differently, so we don't like to assume. However, we do have a standard build style, unless otherwise specified, of course. So anyways, let's go ahead and first start off. We're going to grab one of our plates here, and we are going to install our stack nuts. So our stack screws and our stack nuts here. This is the first step, and I know that a lot of people like to kind of build up the frame and kind of get it to this point first before getting a build started. But with the TinyTrainer Z, I'd recommend just starting with one of your plates. We're going to actually build most of the drone onto the bottom plate, and then install the standoffs and install the rest of the hardware as we get further along in the build process. So I'm just going to go ahead and go one at a time around the four corners of our AIO, of course, here. Grab my 1.5 millimeter driver. Just going to install that. Yeah, Charlito is who I'm referencing when we're talking about doing everything a little bit different on the TinyTrainer Z. Like I said, there's just a little bit different from the V2 and the other TinyTrainers that we've done, and the other in-house builds that we've done as a part of our Ready to Fly lineup. We're doing this one a little bit differently, but that's for good reason, and I'm hoping that that can be communicated on this stream here today, and you can use that to get the best result possible out of your build. So, going to continue going along here with our stack screws. You want to make sure that these are nice and snug. Obviously, if they're not nice and snug, your AIO is going to move around, and of course, the worst thing that can happen is that it can start inducing some jitters, and that will mess with your tune. So you want to make sure these are nice and tight. If you have metal M2 screws, those are fine. However, most of the time we prefer to use plastic ones, and plastic ones are good because they kind of lock down around, and they don't have that, I guess they provide more friction on the threads of the bolt versus a metal one, which you might have been able to, like, whenever you install a metal nut on a screw, you can kind of like spin it, and it will kind of slide down the bolt, I guess. Same thing can be true in reverse. They don't like to stay snug. So kind of keep that in mind. So we're getting this next little M2 nut on. This is number 4. Fourth and final little nut here to get started. What's up, Fresh Bread? What's up, Kestrel? How you guys doing? Thanks for tuning in. I know you guys are some TinyTrainer connoisseurs. We're building a TinyTrainer Z today. I know a lot of people are building these for Ice Storm, so wanted to get this content out as quickly as possible. Okay, so now that we've got that all ready to go, you can obviously do it however you really want to, but I like to go ahead and then do the motors next. So we got our frame prepared. We're going to do our motors. We're obviously going to, do 2 on the bottom plate, 2 on the top plate here. We're going to open these up, and they come in a little set of 4 just like so. Pull them out of the package. And then we, of course, have plugs in here. So if you are, want to run it with plugs or want to be able to hot swap motors, you can use these plugs. Most people don't because you have to solder anyways to solder on the plugs. So unless you really value that hot swap nature, then I guess you don't really need the plugs. And then other hardware that's included in here, there are 2 lengths of propeller screws. So we got the M2x8 screws here and the M2x7. Depending on the propellers that you're going to run with these motors, they might have a thicker or thinner hub than others. So we typically use the M2x7s for these tiny props, but both will work and it won't cause any issues depending on which length you have access to or which one you want to use. So feel free to do whatever. And Kestrel says, love them, waiting on the TinyTrainer Z stock. That's right, we are currently, unfortunately, out of stock of these frames, and we will have more before Ice Storm, though. So if you're coming to Ice Storm, you're worried about potentially getting a TinyTrainer Z in time, obviously we'll be bringing a bunch of these frames to Ice Storm, but we will have some in the next few weeks, so do keep an eye out for that and ask us any questions. Feel free to hit our support email up, and that's support@fly533.com. if you are interested in the lead time or the amount of time we have left until those TinyTrainer Zs are going to be in stock. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and set some of this stuff aside for the moment that we're not going to be using. It does also come with some E-clips as well, so if you lose these E-clips, which if you take the bell off the motor, then you can lose E-clips. You might want to hold on to those, but most of the people won't really use those ever. So we got these M2x4 nuts or screws right here, and these are good for 2mm thick plates like this and the original TinyTrainer. But the TinyTrainer V2 has 3mm carbon on the arms, so you will want to use the longer screws that are provided in the TinyTrainer V2 frame kit for that. And then all I'm doing here, of course, is just screwing on my motors. You want to make sure that you have them on the right orientation. It's pretty easy to see because we already put the stack screws on. The reason we did that is because one side has a countersunk, a little countersunk hole for our stack screws. So seeing that will help us kind of indicate which side we want to put our motors on there. So we're going to do that next. Yeah, Charlito is right. We just simply could not keep those TinyTrainer Zs in stock. We did, I believe, 100 on our first batch. And yeah, they're super popular. They flew off the shelves, and that's exactly how we like to see them, as I'm absolutely struggling to get this screw to stay on the end of my screwdriver. Come on now. Yep, and depending on the weight of your TinyTrainer, you may or may not decide to use 2 screws on the motors. I typically do on mine, but I'm a weight weenie. I'm a whoop racer, so you know how that goes. But the all-up weight for TinyTrainer spec is 160 grams with battery, and because this frame is super simple and lightweight, doesn't have as much hardware as the V2, it is a little bit easier to get a lighter build. So, but some people like to argue that the TinyTrainer V2 is faster because the arms are thinner, and these are the thickness of the V1 arms, but that's because they are only 2mm thick instead of 3. What's up, Mackenstein? How you doing, man? Thanks for stopping by. Watching the stream at work is always acceptable. Yep, we are, Mackenstein, we are looking at doing some more whoop racing here at the shop, too. Hopefully you can make it out for that. Not sure when our next one, I don't know if we have one officially on the calendar, but maybe a week from Thursday we can put one on the calendar. I'm definitely down to get some more racing in at this new spot. Hackenstein says, got our 2 light switches ordered. That's awesome, man. Getting ready for outdoor season. I'm really excited. Just feeling the 70, 80 degree weather that we had over the weekend was just all I needed to get excited for outdoor race season again. So, again, in our local area, I know we'll definitely most likely be able to go out to House Mountain and race, of course, but, we're looking for a little bit closer of a spot, especially for you, people like you who are kind of on this end of town. We want to do more 5-inch racing. It's just kind of ever more difficult. And I know pretty much all race directors have this issue, where you're just kind of bouncing in between different locations and trying to find a good place that is acceptable to host a drone race, especially when you don't own acres and acres of property or know someone that does. It can be difficult. Ordering gates soon. Ooh, that's exciting. That is exciting. Where are we going to set those up? I don't know. If you got a big yard, don't forget to invite me. That's for sure. So we are just putting on our top motors now. You'll see what I did here. Like I said, the plates are exactly the same. So this is countersunk on this side. This can be the top side. However, because there's nothing mounted to the top plate, I, in this case, have made the non-countersunk side the top plate. I think it, that really doesn't matter at all. But sometimes you just got to explain it to yourself to justify it, to make it seem like you did it intentionally, when I actually kind of just picked this thing up and started bolting motors to it. So, Mackenstein says, got some good property. Okay, I'm definitely gonna be hitting you up later, because if you're not too far, we might need to host some races in your yard. Might need to host some races in your yard. If it's okay with you, of course. And I'm just clumsy putting these screws in here. We're getting there, though. This is kind of man. Someone has got to be typing some flaming me in the chat for half the screws I put in. They just fly off the end of my screwdriver. I can't believe I haven't lost one yet, though. Anyways, we are almost done with this step in the process. You want to make sure these things are nice and snug, of course. Again, just in general with drone building, you want to make sure that everything is super torqued down, because that's directly related to how good your drone's going to fly. And of course, if your motor stays attached or not. Like I said, tend to run 2 screws on my TinyTrainers, and I have had motors completely fly off, and that gets stressful when you have to replace those in between heats. All right, so there we go. As you can see, you're going to have your front motors on like this. So this is going to be the front of the drone right here. They are below, and then your rear motors are going to go just like that. They are above. And Kestrel says, 97 acres at mine. Yeah, I've seen that you host races with BDR. We're going to have to make it up to one of your races this summer if you're racing. That's going to be a lot of fun. I've always been up in like Columbus and Cincinnati and wanted to make it down, but it's like a 3 or 4 hour drive to do it. So I haven't done it yet, but now that we're closer, we're definitely going to have to come out to some BDR events. Yeah, Mondo's asking the real questions. How far is Camp Mackenstein from the 533 shop? Yeah, I'm willing to go. I'm willing to go out there and check it out. Especially, private property is always good to race on, because you don't have to share it with anybody. Or even when we're doing a race at an RC club, we always have to share with the fixed wing guys, which never a problem, of course. And I'm as a fixed wing guy myself, I like to hang out and see what people are flying and stuff. But just having to kind of share that area means that you have to have a little bit more care for the public and the people around you that may not be as in tune with the event that's going on, and maybe some of the safety risks involved. Okay, so now we got our motors on. We're going to get back on track here. We're going to proceed with the next step in our build. I'm going to set the back side over to the side here, and we are going to get started with our flight controller, our all-in-one board. This is it right here. This is the HackRC 20 amp F411 board right here. Again, we've been running these for quite some time on all the ready-to-fly builds and on our personal TinyTrainers as well. These are some awesome boards, and they are also pretty cost effective too. I believe this is a under $70 board on our store. So if you're interested, it's a pretty solid one that we do recommend. So unboxing some of the other components here, we've got some gummies that we're about to install. We've got a capacitor that we're going to need to install, and we've got our XT30 lead, and then just a few other wires and battery straps and things like that in here. We don't need those for the moment. I'm going to set them aside. Okay, next I am going to get started on installing some gummies into our flight controller here. So we're just going to get it going. And for anybody wondering and watching and being like, hey, I'm not building the TinyTrainer Z right now, but I might be building one in the next month or two, or a year or something like that. We will be this video, of course, will be recorded and sitting on the 533 channel. So if you are interested in the process involved in doing this, or want to use this as a reference in the future, you can always, of course, go back and play this one back. I just installed that gummy upside down. I'm not going to mention it though, even though I just did. I swear I know what I'm doing. So we're just kind of persuading the gummy to go in with the edge of some tweezers. There we go. There's 1 out of 4. It's going to kind of go around the board here. I like to do tweezers. I think the main thing when you're installing gummies is that you don't use a sharp object, because if you use a sharp object, you can puncture the inner wall of the gummy, like the thin part right here. And if you puncture this wall right there, it can get, obviously then the gummy is going to separate on you, and potentially, then it's not going to be mounted to the stack properly. Oh no, I just lost it on the floor. I really wish I got my technique down. I should have done like 100 of these gummy inserts before ever getting on a live stream, but it's a process, that's for sure. Kestrel says he has 2 races on the schedule now, so I'll have to take a look at the dates and see if we can make it out to one. I know some of my fellow 533 individuals are definitely itching to get outside and fly some 5-inch. All right, we're just about there. 4 gummies in, and with these gummies, you can see they are quite tall on the underside of them, and we don't really need all that height. So I'm going to come in with my side cutters, and now I'm just going to go around, and I like to just cut this section directly in half. So cut the section directly in half. Doesn't have to be perfect, but gonna cut it directly in half, and that will lower the flight controller down. Still gonna have ample space, of course, underneath in insulation from the carbon, but you don't need all this height on these gummies here. So we're gonna get rid of those. And then this is the main part right here, where when you're building a TinyTrainer Z, this is where it kind of varies from other TinyTrainer builds that I've done in the past, at least in my experience. So we're gonna switch cameras over to this camera, and you can kind of see how we have this laid out. We have this arrow right here on the board, and that's gonna go out forward. So typically, if you're going to orient this in the straightforward configuration that was designed from the manufacturer, the way that they say it for you to do it, and that they want you to, and the way that in Betaflight the gyro is oriented, it's going to go just like this. However, there is a problem with that, and the problem is that once you put your standoffs on in the back, Charlito will. I don't even know why I'm saying this. I should have brought Charlito in here. She can tell me all about this issue. So we put our standoffs on in the back and put on our prints and stuff, and now it is nearly impossible to get to that XT30 or to get that USB port, because the XT30 is right in the way. So don't do it like this. Depending on what all-in-one you want to use, there should be a way for you to orient it, but that will kind of free up the USB port to make it a little bit a little bit easier. And you can see that the way we're going to do it today is we're actually going to rotate everything to the right a little bit. So we're going to rotate it to the right. The arrow is now going to the right. Obviously, remember that before you go to fly it, you're going to need to adjust that in your Betaflight configuration. But because of that, now you can see on this one, we have our USB port right here, and you can just plug in the USB port right there. And that will, obviously without any form of issues. Charlie just says, listen to Custom, he knows what he's talking about. Hey, I also built my first TinyTrainer Z directly with the USB port directly in front of the standoff. So I've done this a few times now, so I think it all comes with experience. But if you're building your very first one, these are tips that, can obviously give you a little bit better of an experience if you listen to them or not, or do it however you want. Don't let me tell you what to do. But that's how we're going to mount our all-in-one board in there right like that. Okay, so now let's go ahead and actually get started with our soldering. I'm going to turn on my soldering iron here over there in the corner, and the next phase in our build process is going to be getting our electronics prepped and ready. And before we get into soldering on the board, we are going to start off with our battery lead here. So we're going to get this ready, and this needs to be adjusted so that it's going to fit in our print. And the print, again, is there so that you can kind of hard mount that XT30 in place, and then you don't need to fiddle with it. Plugging your drone in will be a one-hand job now instead of getting each side and plugging them in like that. So that's the goal with this, and we are going to go ahead and get started soldering. Okay, so I'm going to just start off by cutting the heat shrink on the included XT30 wire here. Doesn't have to be perfect. I just like to kind of grab it from the side and give it an old yank. And of course, we just grab some of the wire just like that. So we can go ahead and stretch that wire back out. It's good as new. And we're going to desolder and cut these anyway, so it really doesn't matter how we do that. But I'm just gonna grab it like so. Put it in there vertically, and then I've got my soldering iron. For anybody wondering, I'm at 875 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm not sure exactly on the math for that as far as what that would be in Celsius, but in freedom units, it is 875 degrees. So we're just gonna go ahead and desolder these, free up the connector. Just like that. We'll reuse these wires, but like I said, obviously we kind of cut these up a little bit when we were cutting off that heat shrink, so we're going to cut those off, throw that away. And now we're going to look at our print here. So essentially what we are dealing with is we have this little area up here. Let me see if I go to this other side. You can kind of see this. I know it's a black print. Maybe I should have printed it in a different color here. But you can see we have a little hole at the top, and of course the XT30 cutout or shape on the bottom here. And so this is the rounded side right here, and this is the flat side. So it's going to go ahead and sit into the print flat side like this. Rounded side. So this is how it's going to sit in there, and then it's going to come out the side, if that makes sense. So it's going to come out the side, and so we're going to just make sure that we have that side correct. It's going to come out the side facing towards me, and I am going to strip off the wire. Dreadpool says around 400 to 450 Celsius. Yep, that's what I would recommend setting your soldering iron to, depending on the soldering iron you have in general. And we'll get into more soldering tips as we get things going along here. But in general, the hot, going hot and fast is a good way to solder, because then you can remove the soldering iron before the joint has time to fully cool, and then it will kind of cool in a bubble. And along with the rosin in the solder being there and kind of burning off, that's what's going to give you a nice ball, shiny solder joint. So now that we have that confirmed which way we're going to do it, we obviously need to remember that round is ground, flat side is positive. And so we're going to do that. Just going to go ahead and solder that onto there. I'm going to try this other angle. Let me know in the chat if any of these angles don't, it could be done better or don't look right or what. Because, of course, I'm looking at it with my eyes, so we're good there. A little tip is that sometimes I like to just take the tail of my solder coming off the spool here and kind of just make it stand straight up and down, and that way I can kind of just put my piece that I need to tin up right against it and use that to tin it, and then I can just spin it in my hand. It gives me a little bit more control over how I'm tinning, but everybody does their thing a little bit differently, but that's something that I've been doing for a long time. I don't know if it's the best method or not, but it seems to work well for me. And you'll see me do it over and over again. Because then you just take the piece, and if it's a big piece like this, you can just take it right in your hand and solder it right on. Let me get some fresh solder on this one. Sometimes when the solder joint isn't shiny, or again, you're not getting that bubble effect that you're looking for. It's because the rosin in the rosin core solder has burned off completely, and it does not, obviously that doesn't let it flow the way that you'd like it to. So there's the joint here. So sometimes just introducing some of that solder with the fresh rosin in it that hasn't been burned off yet helps. So we got that there. Oop, get my finger in front of the camera. And sometimes you just want to make sure you get the solder just right and nice and shiny. It's not always going to be perfect, but even if it's not a perfect ball shape, how you know you don't have a cold joint is if that solder is shiny and it's not doesn't have like that matte finish or like a brushed finish to it. So you can see right there. Maybe this other angle has a better look at it or something. But nice and shiny little solder joints. And again, with the round side right here, we are going to orient our wires kind of coming out at an angle just like that. And then now we can grab our print. I'll clean up just a little bit here, but we can grab our print. And then we're going to feed our wires up through the bottom of the print, so up through the XT30 hole, like so. And if you need them to be, need a little bit of persuasion to get them out of there, you can kind of angle them, add a little bend in the wire there. And they should just pop out the top there. And then, if you can't get one of the wires out, just grab it. They'll both come out like this, and then you can do the rest of the feeding kind of just from the connector end. And I like to kind of just put it flat on the table and push downward, like so. And then it'll all come out, and you can kind of see where we're at with that. Where now we have our connector inside right as we want it in our XT30 mount, just like so. So it's coming out, going straight out to the side, and the XT30 is right there flush with the bottom of the print, just as we want it. And then, of course, we need to kind of angle it again so that our standoffs right there for where our antenna mount is going to go aren't going to get in the way of our with the wires and stuff like that. So with that in mind, we're going to set that aside, and we have that prepped and ready for a later step. Now we are going to get started with our motor wire soldering. Now my best tip for motor wire soldering is to always cut it longer than you need to. Then literally anything can happen, and you'll always have some more. So you don't have to worry about ever cutting your motor wires too short, because especially on a brand new set of motors, it gets really annoying when you cut your motor wires too short or you mess up and you have to, re-strip and tin and try again. So on these motors, I'm going to, just go a little bit longer than I need to. I'm going to go about 1/4 inch off the end of the connector. Let's see if I can show you that. So for the front motors, you're going to want to go about 1/4 inch off the end of the connector, just like that. And then over here, once again, about 1/4 inch off the end of the connector, like so. And then another little tip, also, if you haven't realized yet, I'm left-handed. So I don't know if left-handed soldering tutorials make any sense to right-handed solderers, or if that makes any difference at all, but you know, might have to flip things around. But I like to go ahead and just kind of grab all 3 of my wires just like this, and I am just going to go ahead and kind of grab the edges of them, and then you can strip all 3 of them just like that. And then it comes in handy, like I said. Ooh, sorry, didn't mean to bump you guys there. Let me bring it back over to this camera. So now we can kind of get that solder going straight up and down. And then with the solder going straight up and down, we can kind of introduce our wires in there and get them all tinned perfectly the way we want to. Just like that. Cool. With them all tinned, I also like to see how long they are. So you really don't need a lot of exposed wire at all. So I'm just going to kind of trim them down just a touch. Hopefully you guys can see all this. If there's anything I should do differently to better communicate this process, please let me know. I would be happy to adjust. Okay, so same process here, and I'll demonstrate the other way, which is obviously the motor's mounted down to our frame here, and I can just kind of attack each one with a little bit of solder. But however you like to do it, the other way is nice because the wires never leave your hand, and it seems convenient, but there are multiple ways to do this, and of course the best way for you is the way that you like to do it or feel most comfortable doing it, especially when soldering. Obviously you buy these components and you solder to them, so you got to be cautious when you do this. As we get started tinning our motor pads here, you got to be cautious when you're doing this. So whatever way makes you feel most comfortable doing it is going to be the right way to do it for you. So we are going to start tinning our motor pads here, and just want to make sure that you're heating up the actual pad itself. So you're going to rest your soldering iron on the pad and then introduce the solder. You're not just going to try to introduce your solder to the iron and not be touching the pad. The way this works, of course, is that the actual pad itself needs to be hot. AK says, "What's up, No? Hey, AK, how you doing, man? Good to see you. Just building a TinyTrainer Z. I'm doing absolutely fantastic here on this Wednesday afternoon. Hope you are doing well. I saw you were traveling. Hope things are going to plan with that. All right, so now I've got all of my motor wires all soldered or all tinned up, and you can see on some of these ones we haven't tinned up yet, they have these little cups right on the side there. So we're actually going to go ahead and bring the motor wire up into the cup. So I'll just go ahead and grab my motor wire with the tweezers. I'm going to grab it right at the end, just like that, and then just bring this around, and then there you go. There's one. So it's very, very simple process. Actually, I did that one and then grabbed the wrong wire. So I guess we get to do it again. Outside wire first. Does it actually make a difference? No. Am I OCD about it? Absolutely. So we're just going to make a nice little touch right there. And once again, you got to work hot and fast. So that will get you the joint you're looking for. And if there's any question about that, since I already soldered onto there, I'm going to add a little bit more new solder, and that should make it look just perfect. I think I might have frayed out my one on this one. No worries, we're going to dial it in. The first one is always the most difficult. There we go. I'm happy with that one. You can always keep working on it until you're satisfied. Mondo says, for when we get there, TX to RX, RX to TX. Man, I will say, if anybody ever builds a drone here in the 533 shop and you get RX and TX and RX wrong, you will get flamed. You will never hear the end of it. So that's kind of, you know, I love working here, but man, you got to be on top of things, because if you're not, you will hear about it. All right, so just getting this going here. One more. Hopefully you guys can still see that. I'm not trying to get my fingers in your way, of course. Okay, so there we go. We got 3 nice looking solder joints there. Hopefully everybody approves of my soldering job. We're going to do the same thing again for these, this other front motor right here. Then we'll move on to our back motors. Then we'll do our battery lead. Then we'll do our peripherals, and then we'll be done. So that's the plan. Ooh. See where I have to look up and see the camera and see where my finger's at sometimes. Okay, sometimes you just want to get it tacked down, you know. It doesn't have to look perfect immediately. But then you get it tacked down, and then that second time around, once you're just kind of adjusting it, you can make it look perfect. And I like to clean off my iron in between them, get some fresh solder on the end of there. Beautiful. Caden says, it's hard for me to watch in school. Man, do they not like take your phone away in school? Isn't that like a new thing? Or they take your drone or take your phone away? Oh look, we got a special guest. You're gonna show yourself on stream? Here, look at that. Oh, that's really tight shot right there. You can back up a little bit. I would assume that's our good buddy Carter making it in, saying hi to the stream, test flying one of our whoops that's going out to one of our customers, making it through. I have questions about how he got into this closed room, but I believe that there's some ceiling panels that are open here and there, so it's always goofy. All right. I just heard a big crash from out there, and Wade told me he'd be quiet, so I don't know why he lied to me. It's okay, though. All right, so got our front motors on. Again, take your time with this process. With any drone build, the quicker you do it, the less nice it's going to be, and it's always a process. So, just take your time. Of course, if it's your first drone build or one of your first drone builds, then, more time you put into it, or, just more time that you take doing it, the better result you can have. But my one main piece of advice is please do not add too much solder to a given pad on the board, especially around any of these small chips right here. If you do that, you can easily mess up your flight controller, and that's just going to cause a bad experience. So don't do that. But, before you kind of get there, don't force anything. If it's not working, clean off the solder and try it again. So, okay, we're going to go ahead and do the back motors now. So I'm just going to start by tinning these pads up. For what it's worth, with this solder smoke, we always, it's kind of downplayed in FPV, but always a good idea to not breathe the stuff in. So when I'm soldering and I don't have a fan, kind of just hold my breath a little bit, try my best. But, typically like to solder with just a basic fume extracting fan. Obviously, that'll pull the smoke away from your face, and that's the way that you should do it. Then, typically when we're flying or racing or something, we have to make a quick repair out in the field. It doesn't really make a difference because there's wind blowing or it's just a solder joint. But always a good idea, legal disclosure, I guess you might say. And now we're gonna get ready to do our back motors. And I'm not gonna tell you how to do these, but I will give you my method, and however you wanna do it works best. There will be, if you go over the front of the arm like this, if you go over the front of the arm, you may have to extend the motor wire further, depending on where you kind of route it down. However, if you come off the back of the arm and down, like this, I found that you can do it just fine without extending the wires, but you're gonna need all the wire length that you got. So we're gonna trim right at the plug, pull off the plug, throw it away, right at the plug, trim the plug off, and throw it away. And then same process as before, going to strip the wires down and tin them and solder them. But this is where you just want to be, pay attention to what you're doing, especially if you want it to be visually pleasing. You want it to kind of have an order to it. Obviously, you can put any, combination of wires on any combination of motor pads, and it really is not going to make a single difference as it comes to, just obviously having to reverse your motors in beta flight. That's going to be it. But performance-wise, you'll get to the same place. We're just going to solder these up. A little bit of tin on them, or a little bit of solder on them, tin them up. And just like that. We got them going. And so now, this is, like I said, where we're going to want to kind of figure stuff out here. So this is the front going that way. Motors are going to sit like this. And my motor wires are going to come down the arm. There's going to be a piece of electrical tape right about there on the arm. And this is going to kind of rotate around that electrical tape, kind of rainbowing around the electrical tape. And then going in, you can see we got our three wires right there. The three wires are going to kind of go onto the pad like that, if that makes sense. Ooh, here, let me switch to the other camera. So the three wires are going to kind of go on the pad, whoop, like that, if you can see that. A little bit awkward to show, but you just want to make sure that you have, I'm going to grab this wire. I know this wire goes on the outside pad. And then we are just going to, this is a little bit of an interesting soldering strategy, I guess. To make these OmniFixo little grippers a little bit more stable at whatever orientation you have them, you can actually just take one and kind of clamp it to the next one, and that will kind of stabilize it a little bit. And then I'm going to clamp this guy up into a vertical state like this. And that will allow me to get to my piece that I'm working on a little bit easier. And then, like I said, we're kind of coming in straight down from the top now. So into that same cup area on the side of the board, but we're coming down from the top instead of up from the bottom. So hopefully you guys can see this. Try to make it as visible as I can. But we're just it's the same process. Like that. There's one. And then I'm just kind of making sure that I got the same rotation that I'm after. It'll all make sense when we get to the other side, of course. Two. And 3. 1, 2, 3, just like that. Then I'll show you kind of how this is gonna look. But we've got this wire coming around. It's gonna go down the arm, kind of come around and in. And then obviously we don't have our standoffs in yet. It makes the soldering a lot easier, but that allows us to kind of have things run off the board neatly and down into their motor wires without having to extend the motor wires, which is the big deal here. because with these Z-frames, the rear motor wires are always, sometimes can be a pain. If you've ever built like a zigzag or something like that, you need longer rear motor wires. And if your motor wires are too short, nobody's excited about extending motor wires. So we're going to pop this into the other side, just like this. And then we're going to do the same thing where we kind of curve this around and kind of figure out how this is going to lay. And then that's going to be our outside wire. So the close wire will be the outside wire. And then let me see the best way to bring that around. I'm going to try that with a little bit more fresh solder. Okay, there's one. And like I said, this is, this process is kind of a little bit different than your existing process. And Mondo makes a good point. He says, have you tried saving the rear motors for the end of the build? And there is a reason why I don't do that. And that is because when you put the battery lead on, it kind of covers up these motor solder pads. So, depending on how you do your battery lead or any of the wires that are at the back of your build, you can, you can do it however works out for you. So I'm not saying that's the wrong way to do it, but I'm just saying from my experience building a few of these, once you kind of get the battery lead in place, then it makes it a lot more difficult to solder on your rear motor wires. Cool. Okay, so looking at that, looks like we got six shiny rear motor wire solder joints. That's a mouthful right there. And now that we've got those in place, the nice thing about this is that we can kind of just leave our rear unfolded like this and still far away from the board and kind of out of the way. And then when it's time to put it all together, you just flip it over, set it on, and you're ready to go. But the next thing we're going to do now that we've gotten that out of the way is we are going to put some standoffs in and get ready to put our battery lead in place. So most of the time you can just hand tighten these standoffs on and it's fine, but again, you're going to want to snug them up with a screwdriver. So I'm going to come in with my 2mm driver. The nice thing about this is that the hardware kit on this one, or all the hardware is M3 instead of M2, so it's going to be more durable. It's similar to how all the standoff hardware on the Zigzag is M4 instead of M3 for 5-inch racing. So you're not going to bend standoffs or have any issues with that, or at least not easily. I mean, I'm not going to put it past someone that knows how to crash like Dreadpool. And obviously, if you saw the oval race we did last month, that was some carnage, and no TinyTrainer Z's were broken. But yeah, that's probably thanks to our M3 standoffs. So put all 4 of my standoffs in on the bottom plate, and now we're going to go ahead and seat in our battery lead, just like so. So you can see, again, once again, we already did this. It's all prepped and ready to go. There's no stoppage of what we've been doing. We can kind of keep things going on. We're going to push this print all the way down, like that, onto the back of our build. And now we are going to take our wires and push them outside of our motor wires. And now you can kind of see what I'm talking about there, that, the motor wires can get a little bit trickier to solder when you have the battery lead print in place after you've kind of attached the battery lead. So that's why I like to do it before doing the battery lead. All right, so we're going to kind of keep things out of the way of our battery pads right here. Switch over to the other camera and you can kind of see what we're working with here. We are going to get some solder And this is an interesting battery lead. You know, it's like a U-shaped pad, so you kind of got to fill up all of the inside space of the pad with solder as well. And like I said, you want to make sure that you're actually heating the pad up, and that will allow the solder to flow into the pad easier. Just like that. And sometimes you have a bit of solder. I'm going to do this off camera just so I can get a better angle on it. But HackRC smartly has left any small components or anything like that that can easily be lifted with a solder spill or anything like that. But you just want to make sure there's no big solder blobs on the underside of your board if you fed too much solder on in this process. There we go. All good to go. Let's see. UAV Drone Tech Solution says, will there be a new LED kit which works with the TinyTrainer Z-frame? We don't have anything in the works that I know of quite yet, but we can always do stuff like that. The nice thing about this is that there's a lot of flat surfaces, so cob LEDs or even little pieces like from the original TinyTrainer LED kit can attach. But this is a little bit more of a tradition. It doesn't have any plastic canopy or anything like that, so it's a little bit more, fundamentally different than our previous TinyTrainers. And so, like any other 5-inch or Pro Spec or Street League or something like that, cob LEDs do work great for this type of thing. However, we may make a specialized kit with different lengths or a PCB that everything plugs into if there's enough interest, of course. All right, so kind of cut my battery lead pieces. You're going to want to make that ground just a touch shorter. And they lay over it perfectly. I hear another whoop coming. Might be coming for me. We'll see. We're just going to go ahead and get this battery lead connected. So, just like so. All right. And this is going to be nice and short and direct in this case. So I'm going to find where I put my tweezers. We're going to attach our negative lead first. I'm going to switch to the other camera so you might be able to see a little bit better without my hand getting in the way. And again, we're just going to kind of tack it on first, and then I'll come back with more fresh solder, and that will help kind of get the joint looking the way we want it to. Let me heat the entire joint up again. That's looking a lot better already. Add a little bit of extra solder, and that kind of gives us something to sink our cap into. There we go. That's exactly what I'm after there. So once again, especially with these bigger solder joints, and this advice goes for any larger, like a 5-inch or ESC or something like that, where you're putting like 12 gauge wire on. Tack it in place first, and then add more solder, and kind of go back and forth and try to get it looking better. But don't worry about it, being perfect right off the bat. It's a little bit of a process. So there you go. That's what the battery lead's going to look like. Actually, here, let me switch cameras. That's what our battery lead is going to look like for this once it's done. And then the other tip that I have for you is how we're going to mount our capacitor. And this is a little slick. And another big thing with this HackRC board. So like I said, we rotated this 90 degrees to the right. That brings the USB port out front here, and it removes it from being back here where it's in the way of the standoff, and you can't plug in and change settings on your drone as easily. And because of that, because our USB port is now right here on the TinyTrainer, we also have our battery lead, which is out on the side a little bit more, as I just showed you. And that means that our capacitor is right in line with this rear arm. And this is a little if you can see that right there. So our capacitor is right in line with the rear arm, and when you're taping down your motor wires on the top right there, you can just use that same strand of tape and catch the capacitor and mount your capacitor with that piece of E-tape, which is really a nice little trick. So you don't have to worry about your capacitor getting in the way or falling off, or sometimes on 5-inch racing, if you don't secure your capacitor can get ripped off in a crash, and then potentially cause other issues that you did not sign up for. Okay, so I cut my capacitor down a little bit, and I've got it oriented in a way that has the negative side right here. Of course, the negative's on the right side here. And I'm kind of just going to angle my pins down a little bit. You can kind of do this however you please to, but I like to do it this way. And tin up the ends here. And I'm just going to line it up with my pads. And once again, we're going to start off with a tack. We're just going to get it down onto the pad. Start off with a tack. Don't worry about it being beautiful and perfect your first time you touch a soldering iron to the joint. Once we've got that, now we'll come back and make sure the full joint gets flowed with good solder like that. There we go, that's pretty good. So as you can see there, we have our capacitor in place. It kind of goes over top of the leads like that. Makes it super easy. And then that will line up right with our rear arm, and we can just use electrical tape and secure the capacitor to the upper rear arm. Super handy stuff there. Okay, so now we are really close to being done with the build, honestly. We have 8 more little solder joints, of course, for our receiver and our video transmitter, but a lot of the big solders that sometimes are the most intimidating for beginners are done now. So we've got this laying out right here. I'm going to go ahead and clean up my work area a little bit. Anytime you get to a kind of a milestone or a checkpoint in a project where you get one thing done, it's good to kind of get organized and make sure you have all the parts and pieces for the next stage of the build. So now I'm going to come into here and I'm going to open up my camera. We're going to kind of get the low-hanging fruit first. So the first easiest thing to do, of course, is to mount the camera in the camera mount here. So again, HD0 Nano 90 V2 comes with the upgraded lens on it already, so super easy. I can't tell you how much time we've just spent focusing upgraded lenses of the Nano 90s on a garage door at the old shop. So it's good that we don't have to do that anymore. I certainly am not missing it one bit. What's up, Doomsday Rebel? How you doing, man? Just gonna grab most all the hardware. We're just gonna use our short M2 screws that come with the Nano 90 to install it here, and our 1.5mm driver. Let's see if I can make this go a little bit easier than the motor screws process went. So I'm just gonna line that up, screw it down, nice and easy. Just like that. And this is, of course, our variable camera mount, so I'm not exactly sure what the degree values or what the range is, but we do have plans to release like a locked version. So if you want to, a 45, 50, 55 type thing, and you want it locked, so you don't have to worry about your camera angle changing in a crash or something like that, then we will have those coming very, very shortly. So UV Drone Tech Solution says 3S550 LiPo will still fit in the battery mount, or would you recommend 4S? That's a great point. Brings up a point about Ice Storm coming up here just in about a month from now. We're going to have Ice Storm up with the Milwaukee Montessori School at the Pettit National Ice Center. And that is a really cool event, but always we learn more and more about the TinyTrainer spec, and 2 ice rinks is a really big area for these TinyTrainers. Lots of full throttle racing, and we tend to feel some battery sag with the 3S batteries. that we've used in the past. So this year we are going to be introducing the option to run 4S 550s with a 40.5K RPM limit. So we'll have more information on that, an official announcement coming soon, but these batteries will be available on the store for $12 a piece, or I believe a 3-pack for $36. And you can grab those and run it with the RPM limiter. And the goal with that is that it will make the feel of the drone more consistent throughout the battery. It's not going to make it necessarily faster than the 3S unlimited version, I guess, that we typically fly. But it will, of course, make the entire pack feel a little bit more similar. You won't feel as much battery sag, I guess. So more information on that coming soon with full details. We've been doing a lot of testing on making sure that it's fair. Of course, the other alternative is that you can just run 3S without the limiter of any kind, and so that's totally an option too. So we got our camera in the camera mount. Before I put it on there, we do want to run our receiver, and so I'm going to just go ahead and stop doing what I'm doing here for a moment and get started with some preparation for our receiver and video transmitter, of course. So we're opening up our EP2 receiver. This is a TXCO version. Right here. So just a nice little receiver. We don't really find a need to use like an EP1 or something with a full T antenna, but there are many ways to mount the receiver on the TinyTrainer Z. And so if you want to use a T antenna, feel more than welcome to. That is a good point, Charlito. Thank you for mentioning that. We are going to have specifically sized mounts for our battery, like the battery TPU mount, like this little guy right here. We're going to have specifically sized mounts for 3S 550, 3S 600, as well as the 4S 550. So yeah, keep an eye out for those. This current camera mount is going to be good for your 3S 550 and 600. However, we are going to have to modify it for the 4S setup should you choose to run that. All right, with that done, I'm going to get my wires here. A little interesting note on receiver wires. All Express LRS, I'm not going to say all, but most Express LRS and Crossfire, or any receiver that uses the CRSF protocol, are all laid out in the same way and from right to left, so backwards from reading a book, that is ground 5-volt TX RX. So on the right side we got our ground right there. Maybe I can get this in shot on the other camera. The right side we've got our ground there. Just gonna go one at a time. Next over from that is our 5-volt. And then we got our TX. Be white. And finally, RX, which is yellow. Put a little more solder on that one, make sure we get the joint that we're happy with. Once again, for anybody that's not as proficient in soldering and you're still looking to add to your skills, the main thing that you want to know when you're looking for a joint, of course, you want to make sure it's not shorting anything else, but you want to make sure that you have shiny solder joints, even if they're not, perfectly smooth or like ball shaped as some of like the factory ones look. As long as it's shiny, that shows that it's got a good connection, and you can work on how it looks in the future. All right. Make sure it's seated properly. All right, so we got our heat shrink on there. While it's still warm, I like to just kind of pinch this end right here and kind of fold it under if you can. You know, that'll kind of make a little crease right here, and then if not, you can also just trim it off like so. But since it's pinched, it will kind of close it off. Let's see. And Tom Cinnamon coming in on the Facebook chat says, I just built a TinyTrainer Z last night with an HD0 Gamma AIO, Whoop V2, Nano 90 V2, Rush Cherry, R-Line 3S550, and then obviously the TinyTrainers and props, and use the files for the 3D prints off the website for the 15mm setup there, the battery holder and all that. Came out to 161 grams. That is perfect. You know, right where you want to be. Again, minimum weight all up for the TinyTrainer spec, at least as it currently stands, is 160. For our 4S version, we might use an Ice Storm. That may be modified. I'm not totally sure. I'm sure someone in the chat that is also within the building that I am currently in, aka one of my coworkers, can confirm if we are going to be adjusting the minimum weight for Ice Storm. Charlito says, votes on custom getting the TX and RX backwards button. Oh, you know, thanks. Thanks for your vote of confidence. I really appreciate that. Thanks for the kind words. Okay, so now that we've gotten that done, I'm gonna start to get my Whoop V2 out, get it all ready to go. Once again, this is the new video transmitter from HD0, released, I want to say like 2 months ago maybe. But this one's really cool because it's kind of like a Whoop Light and a Race V3 had a baby. So it's a lot thicker than the original Whoop V2 or Whoop Light. And it has the UFL retainer bar from the Race V3, which makes it a lot easier. You know, don't have to worry about damaging your VTX because your UFL antenna keeps popping off. So we're really happy with how this has been working in our TinyTrainer builds. So big stuff. 170 grams for Ice Storm, says Charlito. So keep that in mind. Obviously, being lightweight is not a bad thing. You can just add weight. However, trimming weight sometimes is where it gets difficult. Okay, so put my 4 little gummies in there. Then I'm also going to get my antenna ready to go because it's just a little bit easier to do this before you get too far along. I'm going to have the antenna come in over the board, and then we'll adjust it once we get the retainer bar in place. This is where that small Phillips head screwdriver is going to come in handy. I don't know what I expected to happen there. I should have every time I do stuff like this, it gets a little it's a little clumsy, especially when you're doing it with your fingers and you're working with such small screws. Mondo says, so is yellow on the EP2RX pad? I do yellow on the EP2TX pad. I currently have yellow on the EP2RX pad. That's correct. You're trying to I can smell it. You're trying to get me all confused and second guess it, which is understandable. And I know that Carter does it the same way that you do it, Armando. But I will say there are 2 reasons why I do that, and one of them is that Skip did it this way. No, but the main thing is that you can see right here, I've got the product right in my hand that I would be great to show you. We have ground voltage RX, which is yellow on the Whoop V2, and TX, which is white on the Whoop V2. So in the way that I do it, I always have a component, RX on the component is yellow. And so that's why I have yellow on the EB2. So that's the way I do it. As long as you know your system and you don't get twisted around, it's not a big deal. And I've definitely gotten twisted around and, you know, gotten my little setup wrong, so I'm not perfect in any means. Obviously, I you know, they'll be quick to tell me that there was a pro spec yesterday that we were kind of jumbling around, and I got my RX and TX reversed on it. So just trying to always do the best job you can and catch your mistakes early. Yes, that's right, Mondo. I try to keep the peripherals consistent. That's my thought process. Not to say there's a right or wrong way to do it, of course. All right. So now on our HackRC AIO, typically on our TinyTrainers we use UART1, which is this area right here. So there's UART1 and UART3 are right here on this side of the board. And then on this side of the board we have UART2 and all of our camera pads and VTX stuff. Because this is kind of the VTX area, we like to put our VTX, even if it's an HD0 and it's not going to actually interface with the analog pass-through for the OSD chip and stuff. We like to put that on UART2 and then put the EP2 on UART1. But in this case, we're going to flip-flop it, and that's just purely because of the location of these pads on this specific board. We want to make sure, in this case, the best flying drones don't have wires that go in between and run over the stack or anything like that. Sometimes it doesn't really matter, but typically when you're troubleshooting a drone with random jitters and stuff, if there's wires going right over the gyro or something like that, it can cause all sorts of interference or, again, literally physical knocking or rattling of the wires as vibrations on the drone, make their way into the center of the stack there. But also we found that sometimes with these HD0 video transmitters that if you run your wires touching the board or under the board or anything like that, it can cause like a little bit of a sparkle in the video. Not a huge difference, but if you want the clearest video possible, this is the way that we found might help to do it. So that's just after doing this over and over again and talking with Carter as he's test flying these things. He's done a lot of troubleshooting on this topic. So we are going to aim to run all of our wires on this board that we're soldering to the UARTs here off the sides of the board. Steven Steckenrider coming in saying that it is the fastest build he's done yet. Really stoked on how HD0 fits. Yes, could not agree more. Okay, so I'm going to solder up to our UARTs here. And just knowing the pads you got to solder to. Got to get there. Again, everybody's AIO is going to differ a little bit, but we've got our ground 5-volt. Man, I can't even see that silk screen. R1T1. I wanted to make sure I got it right. Because if I come out, we end this stream, and I go out there, they are going to laugh at me. So we're not going to try. We're not going to try to do that. And of course, it causes more rework for myself and or Carter when he tries to go set it up. So always want to double check coming out TX and RX, just like so. Okay, here we go. We got RX on the board, which is yellow. It's going to go to TX on the flight controller, which is on the end here. Then we flip-flop TX on the board to RX on the flight controller. Just like so. And then we've got ground right here. And of course we've got our 5-volt. And if I can, there's something, I always gravitate to using my fingers on these wires for some reason. It's definitely easier to use, like tweezers or something, but, sometimes it's just a little bit more dexterity or something that makes me want to use my fingers. Okay, so that'll do on those there, and then we are going to solder up our receiver over here on UART number 2. So R2 on the outside. It's interesting because it's like over here is where T2 is. So 5-volt and ground are flip-flopped on this UART or next to this UART, I should say. And Then in the middle we have our VTX pad, which we're not going to use, obviously, because we have a digital video transmitter, and this is for our receiver. Now we're going to spec out the length of wire that we need for our receiver. Our receiver is going to go in some special secret place that you'll see in just a second. And we want about, I want to say like 2 inches off the front of the board. So we're going to cut right there. It doesn't have to be perfect. Just always cut long instead of short. That's my advice. All right, so getting that going, I'm actually just going to set these down and tin them all on the ground here. Sometimes I like to hold the wire. Sometimes I like to hold the solder. Okay, so we're just going to tack these guys on right here. So once again, R2 is going to go from T2, which is white on the receiver, to R2 on the flight controller. A little bit more solder. Try to get that nice look, clean and shiny. And then of course, R2 to T2. And then finally, we got 5 volt, which is on the inside this time. Over here, it's on the outside. So, person who designed this board must know something more than me. There we go. Cool. So our solders are now complete for all those. I know these are really tiny solder joints, and that's kind of just how it is. So, apologies if they aren't as visible. Now we're going to twist up our wires here. Just kind of keep them all bundled together. And again, we want to come straight off the board and not over any of the components on the board. So I'm just going to kind of twist up wires for both of these components. And then now what I'm going to do is kind of get these wires to come around the outside of those rear motor wires that we were talking about a little bit earlier. And kind of in place just like so. So you can kind of see that the rear motor wires are going to go straight up and down. So they don't need to be a factor in this. But we want to make sure that, of course, they're not tight or anything like that. But they're going to come around that back standoff there to kind of keep them from going over the board. And I'm going to make sure that they don't interfere with anything. Just like that. Cool. So now we've got that. Now we're going to take our antenna mount and slide in the antenna. Here, let me switch my camera so you can see what I'm doing a little bit better. Just gonna push in the antenna, clasp it around. The difference between this antenna mount and some of the light switch or some of the other antenna mounts for this specific antenna is that it's going to run straight out the front. So the antenna is going to come out the front of the mount like this. I don't know if you can see that. There's a lot of black carbon, but the antenna is going to come out the front of the mount instead of the bottom of the mount. And it's going to just attach on just like so. And we are so close to getting this build done here. So now, before I get too far along, I'm going to go ahead and install my stack nuts on the top there. These little M2 nuts. You're not going to have a lot of space for these, but we're just going to kind of push them on and then hand tighten them. I also have a 4mm box driver handy too, which is useful for this type of work. Yeah, there's just some. Yeah, these M2 nuts can be a little bit finicky sometimes. Just gotta find how they go on best. And once we get this done, I guess I'm gonna have to plug it in to show you guys that I know how to build a drone properly. But I don't have any 3S batteries around here, so I guess I'm gonna have to plug it in on 4S, right? Don't have a smoke stopper either, so I guess I'm gonna plug it in without a smoke stopper. This is like the big test, right? Big test to see if I know what I'm doing or not. All right, so now we just got to install the camera. We got to use electrical tape to secure our motor wires, and we got to install our receiver. And got to find where I put my roll of VHB tape too. Okay, so going to just push down the camera mount. You kind of got to like flex it. Push it down, and as you can see, I want to make one thing clear before I do this. Receiver is going to go down underneath the camera mount. So receiver is going to go down in front, out in front, underneath the camera mount, right behind the camera. Just like so. Obviously, some people like Steven Steckenrider and Tom were talking about using the Gamma AIO, so they don't have a receiver. It's no problem. Oh look, I just got a smoke stopper and a 3S battery delivered. How thoughtful. It's probably in our best interest to make this drone not blow up. Although I don't think we're gonna have an issue. But yeah, so if you're using the Gamma AIO, the one thing that's really nice about that is obviously the receiver is on board, so you don't have to worry about locating or finding a spot for your receiver to go. But instead, because I have this EP2 receiver right here, I'm actually going to shove it up underneath the camera with a little bit of VHB. And might have to have a special person who's watching online come bring me a roll of VHB because I cannot find my roll that I brought in for this video. But that will hopefully be arriving here shortly. And we are going to get some electrical tape out now. And I'm just going to bring this to the edge of the table and make a little cut down the center because we don't need the full width of the electrical tape currently. With this TinyTrainer build, I like to use a half width electrical tape. So So we're just going to go ahead and cut down this right here. Thank you, Charlotte. Bringing the VHB, coming in clutch. I know I couldn't do this stream without forgetting a few things. But yeah, so, all right, so I got some half-width electrical tape pieces right here. Like I said, just a little bit more manageable, easier to work with. In this case right here, I'm actually just going to go ahead and throw the top plate on now since we've gotten all the internals buttoned up here. And we'll be good to go for the remainder of the build. So we gotta just want to make sure you're not pinching any wires, but you know there's still a little bit of clearance over the top of the Whoop V2 VTX board. So, not a huge deal. Shouldn't be, a problem that you run into. But like I said, I do recommend running the 15mm standoffs over the 20 for a little bit more of a compact build. And if there's any adverse effects from having your motors up higher when you're going to like roll or yaw or anything like that, obviously they'll be minimized if these are, the stack height is less than like the 20mm. And again, here's the 20mm for reference. Let me bring it down here. A little bit taller. So I'm not totally sure. Obviously this thing, we totally believe this thing flies amazing. And I've used it for some excellent TinyTrainer racing in the past. But I recommend the 15mm standoffs for most builds, especially if you're running analog. Of course, your video transmitter is going to be smaller than the HD0 video transmitter, so you shouldn't have any reason that you not to run 15 in my book. However, again, we want to make sure that we're accommodating and making this thing easy to build, and part of making an easy to build drone is making something that fits whatever you want to shove into it. So I'm just going to wrap some electrical tape around our motor wires there. Cut that. There's one. Go over to this front motor wire next. And I like to wrap it around 2 times. So basically 1 full rotation, and then the ends kind of get tucked in on the bottom. I think most people do this on like their 5-inch arms and stuff like that for their bigger drones. But after that, you're pretty much going to be adding an excessive amount of electrical tape. But I know some people that like to just do like a single wraparound of electrical tape on their 5-inch stuff, and I'm like, okay, that might be a little risky. But however you do it, if you're doing it the way that you prefer, you think is best, then that's the best for you. Cool. So there's 3 of the motor wires, of course, and our final motor wire has the capacitor, right? So you can see our capacitor is right here. Got that kind of sitting right up flush against our carbon arm on the underside. And then this one's also a little tricky because you see the XT30 print right here. Let me see if I can get this. The XT30 print is kind of also in the way for these motors to be oriented properly, kind of coming out of the frame. So just kind of do it the best you can. And I'm sure it's gonna work out just fine for you. All right. So I'm going to start by putting the end of the tape on my cap and line it up right with the end of the capacitor, like so. And then line it back up with the end of that capacitor once again. Bring it over one more time. And then bring it up to the end of the capacitor, of course. Make that final trim. With that done, we are nearly there. We are nearly there for this TinyTrainer build. Yeah, and yes, Craig says RTF coming soon. RTF is on the site right now, and I will say these 2 TinyTrainer ready to flies, the next 2 people that order the ready to fly are getting one of these 2, of course, assuming that you order with the HD0 and ELRS configuration. So if you want a TinyTrainer Z of your very own, whether you're going to Ice Storm or not, or you just have a local race you're looking for, or just want to rip it around your yard, you can have this TinyTrainer Z or this TinyTrainer Z if you order very, very soon. And of course, these are HD0 and ELRS. So last thing, of course, we're going to cut out a little square of VHB for our receiver. Little square for the receiver, just like so. Pull off the end, and I'm going to mount this receiver underneath the camera. And this is going to be really hard to see, really hard to show you, but you're just going to have to trust me that it will fit under there. You're going to basically be mounting the VHB side right here to this underside right here, and it won't get in the way, I promise. And I'm just going to it's going to be mounted in this orientation with the wires facing up towards the front of the drone. So wires will face the front of the drone, and that's why you have all this extra wire bundled in here, so you can kind of loop it back in there just like so. So it should be pretty easy. I'm actually going to pull my extra tail wire up a little bit because I think I might have just a touch too much wire. Not a big deal. And then you're going to just push that all the way in until the ceramic antenna is kind of close with our wires there. I don't know if you can see that, but there, ooh, that's a good shot. There is how the receiver is mounted in there. That's the back side of the camera, and I kind of just have the underside of the receiver shoved up underneath the camera, and there's still enough wiggle room. Nothing's touching, or, I didn't have to force it or anything like that. It's in place just like we want it. And there we have it. That's the completed TinyTrainer Z, all ready to go. And finally, the moment where sparks could fly. The moment you all have been waiting for. Of course, we need to test this, and I'll show you guys a little bit of my process to make sure that I'm not going to have an issue when I go to plug this in, or at least doing your due diligence, because some people I've seen plug in a drone that just explodes, and they're like, oh, if I realized that I had this backwards, then, you know, I could have totally prevented that and totally saved myself all that money and the time that I just wasted. So first things first, if you can see on the board where it says positive, which I can see like right next to that capacitor, it says positive. That's where my positive battery lead is soldered to, meaning that the other ones where the negative battery lead is soldered to. I'm also verifying on my capacitor that the negative leg of the capacitor is soldered to the negative pad. Obviously, as I was going along, I made sure there weren't any shorts of any kind. And so you kind of have to do that while you're going along, because you can't really see any of your tiny little solder joints now. And then the last thing, highest recommendation, use a smoke stopper like this one right here. This is a Vi-Fly short saver. Cool thing about this one is that it has XT30 and XT60. We're going to plug in our TinyTrainer battery like so. And I have a short. Just kidding. We are... it says I have a short somewhere. As you can see, that's exactly what your short saver is for. That's awkward. Let's see if this other one that I have has a short. Yeah. Oh, it might be the battery on the smoke stopper actually. So I'm pretty sure this doesn't happen. Doesn't happen twice. We'll need to get this one checked. Not totally sure, but short saver is indicating that I did something, or that there is an issue with the smoke stopper. Do you have another? There we go. Yeah, there might be, sometimes these smoke stoppers have issues. We'll keep Carter in here while I do this, so he can absolutely flame me if I actually did something wrong. But I'm pretty sure that I did it right. Yeah, so that was just a smoke stopper. I was like, what? I was definitely like, okay, well, I built both these TinyTrainers wrong. So we're good to go. As you hear there, TinyTrainer. So you can hear we've got all of our tones. Of course, our receiver in there is blinking up in the front of the drone. And then we have both lights indicating a good camera connection on our HD0 VTX. If you're ever wondering, on these HD0 VTXs, the red indicates that the board's getting power, and the blue indicates the status of the camera. So a solid blue light means that you're currently transmitting and your camera is properly connected. And of course, we have all of our flight controller lights on the inside there as well. So we are good to go. Of course, the last thing we need to do is install our propellers and install our propeller screws. So we'll do that next. And one thing when you're doing this, you know, obviously it's pretty self-explanatory, but I like to just line up my holes as I'm pushing the propeller down. It makes it a lot easier instead of having to line up the holes or, you know, drive the screw in trying to get it to all line up. Just like that. Man, I cannot tell you how glad I am that it was actually the smoke stopper and it wasn't my work. Because if I sat here on a live stream for almost 2 hours and I had actually soldered this in properly and shown you guys how to not build a drone, that would have been a little frustrating. But we're good to go. We got our 4 props on the TinyTrainer Z. You can see the Z mode is activated because our lower front prop is totally out of the airstream of the upper rear prop. So we are good to go. That is how you build a TinyTrainer Z. Obviously, you're going to want to take your prop screws and install them on the props. But for now, we'll just leave it as is. Thank you guys again so much for hanging out with me here this afternoon as we built this TinyTrainer Z up. Again, if you are interested in one or both of these TinyTrainer Zs, they are available now in the Ready to Fly section of our store, or just on the homepage, I've heard, is where you can find them. Again, if you're one of the next two people to order a TinyTrainer Z Ready to Fly, one of these will be yours, of course, pending the configuration that you choose. But we can build them analog, we can build them HD0, we can build them with Crossfire, Tracer, of course, ELRS, or anything else you might have in mind. We are super excited about this frame and about you guys building one for yourself. So if these tips that you found in this stream were useful, if you're watching this back in the future, please go ahead, subscribe to the 533 channel on YouTube, follow us on Facebook. It really means a lot because we're trying to do this more and more often. As you can see, we're here in the 533 studio now. We're going to be filming a lot more videos, both videos for the channel, but also shorts and live streams just like this one where we build different types of drones and show you guys some of the tips and tricks that our expert builders like Carter and Brody and myself have used in our ready to flies that we build for the site. So again, if you're interested in any of the drones that we sell on fly533.com, go ahead and check them out. You can configure them however you like, and if there's a configuration that we're not advertising, of course you can use your order notes and let us know what you have in mind. Any questions about our capabilities, of course, go ahead and hit us up at support@fly533.com, and we can hopefully get you squared away with anything you might need. Until next time, guys, thank you guys for tuning in, and I will see you guys later. Go out and rip some packs. We're going to have a good time here at Ice Storm coming up April 24th through 26th here in about a month up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. See ya.